I'm the oddity on this panel, so I will just quickly explain where I come from. As Michael says, I was a lawyer in a major international law firm for 30 years, and I was also a judge in the criminal courts here in the UK for 11 years. So when I shifted 7 years ago out of that by choice into the world of international development and also doing access to justice and access to education for the poorest people here in the UK as well, where there's still a lot of need. The job that I took up 4.5 years ago was as a commissioner with this newly created international aid watchdog called the Independent Commission for Aid Impact, which was effectively the UK government's quid pro quo for committing to the 0.7% of GDP. We're an entirely independent body, so I don't speak for government, I review and critique government. We report direct to Parliament here in the UK. We publish all of our reports, and in 4 years we've published we're about to have published 43 reports. And we cover every aspect of what UK government aid expenditure is spent on. So our job is to find out whether UK aid expenditure is actually having the impact it's meant to be having. Is it getting through to the people it's meant to be getting through to? We make recommendations, and the UK government, the Department for International Development, which is the major department spending that money, and that is almost £11 billion a year, so it's quite a lot of money. They are required to respond to our recommendations, and then we follow up after a year, we follow up after 2 years to see whether they've actually put in place the improvements that we recommend they should put in place to do the job even better. I've found all of these presentations very powerful and provocative. And so many of them chime in with when my starting work in international development was working with CAMFED, who, as you undoubtedly know, do girls' education in sub-Saharan Africa. And we did a report for them called Accounting to the Girl, which was all about CAMFED's governance model, which we presented at the, I presented with others at the opening plenary forum at the Skoll World Forum 5 years ago, so it's a great pleasure to participate here. I thought it might be helpful just to draw out a few of the very common themes that we're finding in these 43 reports in relation to UK aid expenditure, which chime in for me with a number of the themes that have been made so far, because these are things we're finding over and over again, and they are all about good development and how best to achieve impact, how to maximize it, how to make it sustainable. And first and foremost, the focus on beneficiaries. I come from a world where we call these people our clients, to whom we have a duty of care. I like to think of them as, in this world, as intended beneficiaries, which is, it's the development work is intended to assist them, but is it actually reaching the poorest people? Is it actually for their benefit? Are they actually being included in this? Not just as a tokenistic consultation, but as Eduardo was saying, actually bringing the population in as part of the process. Who better to implement, to supervise implementation, to see whether there's corruption, to work out whether it's actually helping them, to make it sustainable. And I find it very interesting that in the 4 years we've been doing this, Mark Lowcock, who's he's the head of the Department for International Development, has twice now publicly said that one of the things that our commission has done is made DFID refocus on the beneficiary. He said this to Parliament at the end of our first year, which was, he said it was one of the most significant things we'd achieved in terms of impact on the UK government. And he repeated it before OECD DAC only a few weeks ago. Now, you might say that it was rather obvious that you should have a focus on the beneficiary and the poor who you exist to serve. But it is something which the bigger an organisation and the more remote it is from the actual people who it exists to serve, the more the line of sight through to those people can be lost. And I think that what I'm hearing about this social progress index is that it brings the people and their needs into the fore, which I think is an incredibly important thing. Secondly, again, it sounds obvious, hanging in there for the long term. As Paul said, I mean, I've done a lot of work in education, particularly education for girls in this area. And the notion that one only concentrates on primary education. When I was in Ethiopia in December, the recurring theme from the incredibly poor people that I was meeting was their disappointment that the standard of teaching in the schools was not sufficient to enable their children to get through to secondary education. And a good part of the problem is because the teachers themselves dropped out of education when they were only at level 10, because they didn't get on to secondary education. The investment has to be long-term. We've all been to school. We know it takes a very long time. There isn't a quick way through it, and certainly primary education isn't enough. So hanging in there for the long term. And one of the issues we've come across time and time again with DFID is that the pendulum needs to shift. There's been a strong focus on achieving results. That's good, that's important. But if it's a sacrifice of longer-term sustainable development because there's a desire to come up with positive, big numbers quickly, you're going to be losing sight of the real problems that affect people. A third common issue is get away from silos. Again, multi-pronged approaches, absolutely vital. Collaboration across all these different sectors. Again, when I was talking to women in Ethiopia, they'd been helped with food security and public basic goods. And the profound effect on them was that this meant not only that they were able to feed their children 3 times a day, which they certainly couldn't do 10 years ago, but also now they could send their children to school. Now they were members of committees who actually had some vision of what spending money meant, what deciding, are we going to work on that irrigation ditch or are we going to build this school? What are our priorities? They made them feel, as they said to me, they'd undergone a mental revolution, realizing that they could actually say, this is what needs to be done. This was empowerment in action. And in turn, it meant their girls and they themselves weren't going to tolerate violence and abuse at home any longer. They just were transformed people. Now, the silo effect of programming means that what the donors are doing is measuring the success of that particular silo of expenditure, thereby missing, in this instance, the fantastic multiple holistic beneficial effects of that programming. And unless you see things from the point of view of the intended beneficiary and look at problem solving, their problems, you're going to be making assumptions about what these people need, and you're going to run the risk of either misfiring or actually not doing as much as you could. And then, fourthly, learning. This sounds so obvious it's hardly true, that obviously people ought to learn from what they're doing. But there is not nearly enough really active learning going on, by which I mean not doing quantities of evaluations, however good they may be, and putting those on the shelf or in an IT system that then becomes inaccessible. It's a question of ensuring that that learning and the real experience of people on the ground is turned into action, always actionable work. And if it's only going to sit on a shelf, quite frankly, you have to ask yourself, was it worth doing in the first place if it's not making a difference, not just to that program, but across programs, across the sector, across countries? Learn the lessons of what's working best and turn it into action elsewhere. And that's something which DFID has responded to our challenge on that really very well. They're making enormous changes there. And then I think, finally, I just wanted to say that the business of context analysis and focus is absolutely vital. And within that, and I'll be interested in the ongoing discussion, I mean, really vital in all of this is what kind of political settlement is actually responsible in country. Rwanda, I mean, I was in Rwanda in December, and it is, as Paul says, incredibly impressive. The way that whole country has come in 20 years is quite astonishing. But it's, the government has a distinctly pro-poor agenda. I've met people in the Rwandan government at very senior levels. They are really dynamic. And they say, they do a division of labor between the major donors and agencies. They say, we're not having you people doing health. We want these people to do health. And the reason for that is we're not going to comply with umpteen different donors' requirements and program measurement requirements. That's wasting our time and our effort. But also, we actually like looking at, are you any good at doing this education thing in your own country? And if you're not really good at it in your own country, why would you come and tell us about it? Now that is an impressive approach. And it really galvanizes the donors. And it makes them focus. And it makes them concentrate on doing this pro-poor agenda. But if you're dealing with other governments and other political settlements, it's a different thing. So I do see the enormous strength of this index, but it does seem to me the big question is actually how will governments use it, how will political settlements use it, and how can one make it make a difference? Because certainly our work is always about the how. It's, you know, is it going as far as it should? Is it penetrating as far as it should? So thank you.